This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. When Aaron Neville sang "Tell It Like It Is," that phrase, as applied to New Orleans musicianship, could have referred to a city of robust creativity. With the Jazz Fest only a week away, we'll look tonight at who's on top in the city's music industry and the rising stars. In Baton Rouge, legislators continue their dance, and candidates for the fall elections tune their budget numbers. And in a week when the national Fox News network took a major budget hit because of election fraud allegations, we will examine Louisiana's reputation for counting votes. We'll also look at the latest in the New Orleans police chief selection process and take a special look at the increase in homelessness in the city. Joining our band are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Greg LaRose, editor-in-chief of the Louisiana Illuminator, LeBron Joseph, news anchor and reporter, WGNO-TV Channel 26, and Missy Wilkinson, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. Greg, we're going to go first over to you because the legislature is in session, and that's what you guys are really taking a deep dive look at, what's going on in the state, which includes the state legislature. So what are you seeing happen? What are the main things that are happening right now?
So it's a fiscal-only session, which means the budget and taxes have to be the focus of lawmakers. They still, though, get to file a maximum of 5 bills non-budget related. And as you can imagine, a lot of the hot-button social issues are making their way in there. There'll be anti-LGBTQ legislation. We anticipate some attempted tweaks of the abortion law, some handgun legislation to factor in there as well as regulating hemp. There's a controversy going on there. And of course, when you're talking about a fiscal session, it's all about, whether or not there'll be any new taxes introduced or lawmakers really diving into spending the money that's available, including the big surpluses that are there because of COVID-19 and storm recovery.
So yeah, there's money to spend right now. That doesn't mean there's going to be money to spend next year necessarily. So how is the legislature dealing with that? And then with taxes, I mean, isn't there a quarter-cent sales tax that's going to fall off soon?
0.45% portion of the sales tax expires in 2025, and that's going to mean hundreds of millions falling off of the state revenue figures. So there's a little bit of playroom there, but you mentioned the key words. Right now, they have this surplus. They will have to, if they want to, their ceilings on how much they can spend year in and year out based on the surplus dollars. So they would have to vote in a 2/3 majority to spend beyond that spending cap. They're also looking at some creative ways of doing it. I think the big drama is going to come up based on what Republican leaders in the legislature have proposed this past week, and that's to look at how they can retire state debt and not necessarily jump into the pay raises for K-12 teachers and college faculty. That's a lot of based on the one-time dollars. Of course, the teachers and faculty want that to be permanent.
Sure.
So they will likely be clashing with the interests of Governor John Bel Edwards, who has promised that pay raise in his budget.
But once again, if it's recurring, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it as a recurring pay raise. So that's something the Louisiana legislature will certainly have to tackle. Another thing that they've been dealing with, which is kind of interesting, I think a lot of people were finding it interesting, is hemp.
Yes.
Controversy surrounding hemp and changes in legislation regarding hemp.
Right. It all deals with edible hemp with the compound THC. Basically, it's the stuff that can get you high. And different from marijuana, hemp doesn't have a lot of THC in it until you start sort of messing with its chemistry. So House Speaker Clay Schexnayder introduced a bill and got it passed last year that allowed edible THC products, gummies, soft drinks, and such. And the limitations were placed on serving side. Let's use a candy bar, for example. So one serving of the candy bar would have the allowable amount of THC or under it. if you ate the whole candy bar, you're going to get high. So that was a gaffe that Schexnayder noticed. He pointed fingers at the health department. They pointed them back. Long story shorter, he's come back with a bill that kind of cleans that up on the House side. On the Senate side, Senator Stuart Cathy of Monroe chairs the Ag Committee. He's got his own bill that takes those limitations even further. There's an amendment on it that really keeps that THC level super low. And the hemp industry folks, those that grow it, those that package it and wholesale it, are saying, God, that's going to cost us hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to retool our operations, and then we're going to lose customers to boot and have to fire employees. So this is heading towards a collision course between the House and Senate versions of this hemp refinement bill.
Because there is an industry now,
Oh yeah.
and also consumers.
Yeah, and money that goes to early childhood education based on the tax on hemp products.
Okay, all right, well, we'll be looking for that one. Thanks a lot, Greg. Okay, Missy, we're going to go on over to you. You did a piece last week in the paper about homelessness, taking a look at homelessness in the city of New Orleans. We see these encampments around the city. What did you discover?
So I think that the discussion about homelessness has really shifted around its increasing visibility. Our number of unhoused homeless people on the street is around 400, which is a number that has kind of been bopping around for a few years now, according to experts. But what has changed is those people have moved to areas of higher visibility, and there's also been a gradual uptick since the coronavirus pandemic. At that point, homelessness in New Orleans was essentially eradicated due to an influx of FEMA and HUD dollars that housed homeless people in hotels. That money ran out, and then those people actually ended up mostly permanently housed, the people that had been in hotels, and now we're seeing those numbers tick back up. Unity, which is the organization that kind of spearheads all of our homeless outreach and other organizations under them, conducted in January their annual point-in-time survey, where they just go out and manually count every person who's actually asleep on the street. And they estimate that the number this year will be probably higher than it has been in the past, of about 450 to 550 people living on the streets that are among the unsheltered homeless. Sheltered would be people who are sleeping in shelters at night. And they attribute that uptick to the lack of affordable housing.
So what is being done? What kind of programs are in existence right now using a lot of money, federal dollars, that have come in to deal with this problem?
That's the good news. We have a big pot of money coming this way, and also some new programs. We've got $29 million in HUD dollars that will go to help with existing programs to keep funding those. We also have an additional $30 million coming from the Department of Housing and Urban Development that will go toward rent, housing, street outreach. The New Orleans Department of Health is also launching a mental health arm. Basically, they're going to be responding to 911 calls that come in and don't fall under the purview of police or fire or a medical emergency. Some counselors or social workers will go out, and not all homeless individuals have mental illness, but a number of them do and are using emergency departments for things that don't really qualify as perhaps a medical emergency. So the hope is that this will get these individuals connected with resources and put them on a path to housing, to some sort of independence. It generally costs about $15,000 to house a homeless person and give them case management for a year. And that's the same as it costs if they don't receive those, and they're subject to costly arrests or using emergency departments in ways they're not really.
There's always been homelessness, but it's only in the last few years we've seen the people out on the streets and camping out. And that's not what really concerns people, because they wonder, well, if there's that many more homeless people, what happened that all of a sudden we have this highly visible community that's camping out on the streets?
So in the recent history, I believe around 2012, but I'd have to double check that, the Supreme Court ruled that it is unconstitutional to move people who are camped in public. And so we do not do that. We allow those individuals to continue camping on public streets or wherever they may be. The New Orleans Department of Health and the police do periodic sweeps of these encampments where they offer medical outreach and clean up some debris and just sanitation stuff. But otherwise, individuals are allowed to stay there, and they typically choose these heavily trafficked corridors because of the access to services.
Now you quote Dr. Aveno, the city health director, saying that really New Orleans isn't really that much worse than other areas, about an average, and also that the city now is actually creating a specific department or agency to deal with this, and has named a person to be the leader of that?
Yes, that's correct. I believe in February, Nathaniel Fields, who came here via Baltimore, became our homeless czar, as they call it. And so he is going to just specifically own all the issues that pertain to homelessness. So in the past, that might have bounced around like, well, who owns this? Is this a police issue? Is this a health department issue? Is this sanitation? And now there's this one individual who has himself experienced homelessness and can speak to it from his lived experience to kind of coordinate the strategy.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I'm just throwing here a little bit. The Pontchartrain Expressway, where it is now, historically, that had been the corridor where most of the homeless were. And a few years back, that was fenced off to become parking. And then these areas people started to move into these other areas where we have them, as Missy pointed out in her article. The Claiborne corridor has grown dramatically as the corridor where you come down on the at the Tchoupitoulas exit, and that is probably the two very largest ones, which is pretty close to where the Pontchartrain Expressway encampments used to be, if you will. In the neighborhoods themselves, the impacts on the neighborhood, obviously no one wants this in their neighborhood, if you will. If you have children, and certainly people that have some of the social problems that come with some of this, be it mental illness or drug abuse or nudity or any of that type of stuff, if you've got to bring your child to school and this is going on very close to you, it's uncomfortable. And I think that has been the pushback off the neighborhoods themselves, that people live close to there. No one lives close to the Tchoupitoulas one. It's just an eyesore, if you will, right? It's these people's lives, but it looks bad. But the Treme neighborhood one and some of the stuff down in the Marigny, those are closer to where people live. And certainly the people that live around there are a bit uncomfortable with it.
In some of these encampments, some of these tents can be pretty sophisticated. I've heard of generators being there, and then there's also bikes for sales. In parts of bikes. So, so basically, does the city think that they're going to move into handling this a bit better now?
Yes, the city is behind the Housing First initiative, which aims to get these people off the streets and get them into housing. The idea is that you can't tackle addiction issues, you can't tackle mental issues until you first get these people out of this dangerous situation that may exacerbate those conditions.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll be seeing what you report on in the future. Thanks a lot, Missy, and it's nice having you around the table, too.
Thanks,
Welcome.
good to be here.
All right, LeBron, over to you. Let's talk music. That's something we always love to do. And
we can all come together on the music scene.
So we just came off of a full weekend of music with the French Quarter Fest and going into another full 2 weekends with Jazz Fest.
Full 2 weekends with Jazz Fest. And, Jazz Fest and French Quarter Fest both hang their hats on something that we do very, very well, and that is employ hundreds of local musicians, artisans, bands, Mardi Gras Indians, social aid and pleasure clubs and all. We probably do that as well, if not any better than anyone in the country. And we put them on our biggest showcases, which is the big free festival that is French Quarter Fest, as well as Jazz and Heritage Festival for those 2 weekends. By the looks of who's hot, who's not, and there's no who's not, it's all, what your taste is. The music scene remains pretty healthy. We certainly have our standard bearers of people that we love that are in the classes by themselves. Irma, Deacon, Aaron, Cyril, people like that. But the stars themselves, some national, John Baptiste. You and I were laughing earlier. He was on the poster last year, but he couldn't do the fest because he was booked
at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, so he had to excuse that last year. But John Baptiste coming home this year, that's a big one. Trombone Shorty was named the closer of Jazz Fest several years ago. That continues to be huge. He is certainly amongst our largest. There are some artists, I wouldn't say that are lesser in any way, but certainly have their own niche. Terrence Blanchard coming home. He does so every year. Terrence, huge deal. His second opera at the Met this week opened and all, but he'll be here for Jazz Fest. Other big names, Tank and the Bangers, Big Frida, all of those names, Boyfriend, have continued to do really, really well. Galactic on the touring circuit, but also performing here locally. They're amongst our bigger ones, and all of them are opening just prior to some of the national artists. The brass band scene continues to be healthy with bands like Rebirth and Soul Rebels this year performing with one of Errol's favorite group, the Wu-Tang Clan. They'll be performing together, Errol. I know you're a big Wu-Tang fan. And as far as the young brass bands, Kings of Brass, who won the brass band competition with Red Bull, they are performing Jazz Fest as well. Just a couple of notes, if you're out at the Jazz Fest, a couple of big groups that are making noise, and the Jazz Fest folks love these people as well. Global Warming, Hasizzle, Duran Jones, and People Museum. If you can put them in your notes and you're walking past to get a meat pie or something, and any of these folks are performing, you certainly want to stop and hear them.
Just a great platform and venue for music of all kinds, certainly. At the Jazz Fest, you hear a lot of everything, a lot of our established and up-and-coming musicians. And Terrence Blanchard, you mentioned him. Doesn't he do the score for Perry Mason, the HBO?
He does the HBO Perry Mason
Even if you don't want to watch the show, tune in to listen to the music. It's just really fantastic. It really is great.
Some of these people like Tank and the Bangers and Big Freedia. I mean, a few years ago, like these were new faces. And all this, huh? They were established New Orleans.
They are the established.
Like Al Hurt, you know.
Well, Tank wins the Tiny Desk contest up in New York for NPR Tiny Desk, and then the following year gets nominated Best New Artist for a Grammy and all. So Tank and the Bangers have made their noise, and they continue to record a lot, and they're prolific. Touring as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, Terrence, I'm extremely fond of Terrence. Terrence and I were in the band together at St. Aug, and Terrence is one of the people that made me realize that I wasn't going to be a musician. Okay, so we're friends, and I love him, but he is that kind of talent, just brilliant, you know.
A wonderful talent that we keep
But you
growing
became a
here.
TV star.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that. Thank you.
All right, so a chance to hear a lot of good music.
Yes.
I mean, always, you know, at the music clubs and everything too, good venues to go hear our local music. But all right, thanks a lot. And I know you're a good musician.
No, I was many years ago.
All right, thanks a lot, LeBron. All right, Greg, let's go on over to you because, you know, we are in now a statewide election and a lot of different offices are up for grabs here, including governor, of course.
Yeah, and the governor's race obviously is the one drawing the most attention. Campaign finance reports, the most recent through April 7th, came out earlier this week. And to no one's surprise, Jeff Landry continues to lead the pack with fundraising in excess of $6 million. The newcomer to the race, Wagaspact of Laborde, managed to pull in nearly a couple $1 million. The thing worth noting there is that he's done nearly half of that through PACs that you don't have to identify who's giving the money. So if you're looking to figure out who's actually behind them, you're going to have to do even more digging and maybe not, find anything there. I think we should all put like an asterisk behind this as well, because you'll rewind to 2015 when a little known and a not so well funded John Bell Edwards was sort of an afterthought in the pack of contenders, and lo and behold, he came out ahead then. And in 2019, when you had Gary Risponi pouring all kinds of money into his self-funded campaign, the governor prevailed in re-election. So it's worth tracking now, but doesn't necessarily tell us who's going to win.
No, but there are a lot of others that are going to be running for other seats. I mean, new Secretary of State, the Treasury. So, you had mentioned in the piece that you wrote about this that it's really been, 50 years since we've had such a big statewide turnover.
Yeah, we've got 7 statewide elected offices. 5 of them are turning over. And I looked back, back when we used to elect a school superintendent, an elections commissioner, and I couldn't find any time period when there was so much turnover there. So yeah, this is going to be one where voters will need to do a lot of homework.
And that included one big surprise in that the lieutenant governor's office did not turn over.
True, yeah, and everyone figured Billy Nungesser would be a serious challenger there, but I think he's realizing that's probably the best job in state government. I mean, he gets to ride on floats, go to festivals, and essentially be, a tourism mouthpiece. I think he also knew, too, there'd be a lot of infighting within the Republican Party insofar as splitting that money around. That, is going to be, I think, a factor.
The big thing about lieutenant governor is every morning you wake up, look in the mirror and say, by the end of the day, I could be governor.
That's optimistic, yeah.
And of course, another real important position is the state insurance commissioner. And how many people have jumped into that now?
Right now, only one is talking about it seriously, and that's Tim Temple, who challenged Jim Donelon a few years ago. It kind of gave him a good run for re-election. With Donelon stepping aside, I think Temple's the person to beat. He's self-funded to the tune of, he's loaned himself another $950,000. I want to say he's got closer to $2 million total, and no one else really has talked about this. Eric Skrmetta has been mentioned, the Public Service Commissioner, but I don't necessarily know that he's going to get Republican Party backing, with Temple already in the mix and having that much money into it already.
And money counts
Oh, yeah.
in a campaign. All right, Greg, thanks a lot. Over to you, E. Talking about elections. In Louisiana has really done pretty well. I mean, we haven't really heard about a problem with vote counting in our state.
Yeah, there are two things in recent weeks that just kind of brought this to mind. One was when Kyle Ardoin, who's the incumbent Secretary of State, announced he wasn't running again. And he said one reason he didn't like all the lies out there. And what he was referring to was all the people that are challenging Secretary of States around the country with vote counts, going back to the Donald Trump thing and the people who believe in the false election, and he's just very sensitive about that. And he's a Republican, all right? But there's groups within the Republican who are challenging the other groups, and he was just really upset about that because, in his mind, they've done a good job of trying to keep everything clean. And the other thing is what happened this week with the Fox News and the lawsuit against Dominion. A huge result with that compromise going to have. But it was that same type of issue. It was Fox News essentially admitting that they had falsified information about it. And so anyway, it just shows how ugly that scene is out there in terms of people accusing false election counts. Anyway, I got to thinking about Louisiana. And Louisiana was always a state that people said, well, it's got to be corrupt. It's Louisiana. Well, I think that goes back to the long thing. And there used to be rumors in Plaquemines Parish in Election Day that the votes came in alphabetical order and that the dead people voted too. but the truth is, in recent time, there hasn't been that much example of it. And in 1952, there was a governor named Robert Kennan, who was a former judge. He was elected governor. He was a conservative guy. And he knew all this bad reputation that Louisiana had. He thought, I don't want this for Louisiana. We're going to really be clean with election. And he got a bill passed that every parish is going to have electronic voting machines. Now, at that point, 2 or 3 already did. Orleans Parish is one of them. I think East Baton Rouge. But they created a budget and financing for every parish to get voting machines and to contract with trucking firms to bring the voting machines back and forth. And so that was a real effort. That was the governor saying, hey, look, we're going to be clean. At the same time, there was a guy who was Secretary of State named Wade Martin Jr. He served as Secretary of State for 30 years, right? And he had the reputation of just being like a really great Secretary of State. And that office has always had a good reputation for efficiency. And Wade Martin rode this horse too. He says, we're going to have a clean election system. And so they developed all kind of procedures. And then once they got those electronic voting machines, they'd loan them to schools so students could go and see how a voting machine works. And so there was really an all-out. I think Louisiana was so stung by the reputation it had that it went to the other side. And, you know, in past elections, every so often there's an election where there's a controversy about the vote count being high, but I don't remember any controversy about anyone questioning the vote count and the apparatus. And even when Coral Ardoin, when he was just so infuriated with the national count, they called for an audit. And the state allowed to say, look, we're doing everything right here. And so that's just one thing to realize about the state. Man.
Well, that's a good thing, too. Real quick?
Yeah, what jumped out to me in Ardoin's statement announcing that he wouldn't run for re-election was that when he was running this voting systems commission to choose the next technology, he gave open, unfettered access to Mike Lindell of MyPillow to go on and on about the big lie. So for Ardoin to kind of argue that, hey, stop talking bad about my people, he's basically handed the mic over to the guy who's had the loudest voice in all of this.
But, and we do use Dominion machines too, don't we?
For now,
machines,
yeah.
All right, great. Thanks you both. And Quickly now, Missy, over to you. Let's touch on, once again, kind of quickly, the search for the new New Orleans police superintendent.
So the search for the top cop rolls on. Last week, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is the outside agency that is tasked with conducting this national search, conducted a series of focus groups across the 5 districts in New Orleans to basically solicit from locals what they want to see in their superintendent, what kind of qualities they're looking for. And people had some somewhat contradictory ideas about that sometimes. But the next phase of the process will be they will collate all those answers, including surveys they're taking from the department itself, the police department, and put together a candidate profile. Once the city has signed off on that, it will go out along with marketing materials to chief associations nationwide. And basically, they're trying to get as many candidates as they can to get New Orleans the chief they need to move the city forward. And that may be Woodfork, it may be somebody else. We're going to wait and see.
Any more of these public hearings to be held, or they're done?
Those have concluded, but if people did not get the chance to attend, they can weigh in by emailing. The email address is, well, actually, it's a website. Sorry.
They can they check on the city website or the NOPD probably?
It's actually a IACP website. I'll just give you the email address that people can email with questions, and they can be directed to the survey.
Right.
It's New Orleans LA at the IACP.org.
Okie doke. And then the timeline for this profile is when? When is that supposed to be done?
So the search is about 15 to 17 weeks, according to the contract. The profile is supposed to happen at the 6-week mark.
Okay.
They did not offer a specific timeline for when they will furnish and get back that candidate profile, but they're hoping within the next few weeks.
Okay, very good. All right, other stories, guys. E.
There's election day next week. It's on the 29th. A very, very low-profile election in Orleans Parish. There's a judicial runoff. But kind of interesting is that Sheriff Hutton has a millage proposal that would double the millage, and it's getting strong opposition because the BGR opposes it. And usually once the BGR opposes something, that influences the newspaper. So I think it's going to have a hard time.
Okie doke. Greg, over to you.
Yeah, one interesting thing that death ballads, songs like you think Johnny Cash is famous for, they now probably won't be allowed to be admitted in criminal trials as evidence against. We've seen this come up in cases with C Murder, with Kid, and there's a bill going through the legislature that would prevent what they're called death ballads from being used as criminal evidence in those trials.
Over to you, LeBron.
Very interesting. The Congressman Troy Carter meeting with Secretary Mayorkas to talk risk rating 2.0. Don't know what comes out of this, but apparently this was a good meeting, according to what his folks are saying. And that's going to have to move a mountain to get us to a better place with the insurance payments for flood insurance right now. But the fact that we've actually gotten a meeting done, I guess it's
At least
good
it's
news.
a start. Okay.
At least it's a start. You're right.
Missy, over to you real quick.
Oh yeah, On Scene Services, which is the private company that is tasked with assisting NOPD with minor traffic incidents, is expanding. Their fleet is going from 4 to 7 vehicles beginning in May. They are also launching a pilot program in Baltimore, which will start by July 1st. And they have an eye towards expanding this model nationwide, which is fairly unique. It was originally conceived of as the Uber of traffic investigations. And it's a civilianization effort, basically.
All right, guys, thanks so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.